Well, good morning, everybody. This is a bug hunt story. It's going to be kind of unusual. I sort of uh, tried to cut out a lot of the fluff that was in this story and just cut to the chase. You know, it's passive anti-theft stuff, immobilizer or whatnot. Started it basically in 1993. You know, where the key had a chip in it. Not the one that the GM cars used to have a little resistor pellet in the key that if it didn't match what was programmed to receive, the module to receive, it wouldn't let the car start. But the chip in the key that actually would output the number that would go to a module that would it would either disable the starter, it disabled something, it did something to keep the engine from starting. Not the same on every car, but in 1993 they started using it in Europe, and it reduced car theft by 78%. And the first passive anti-theft I saw on a Ford was on Taurus in 96, I'm sorry. And so that was something that we had to learn how to negotiate. And there were all kind of little oddball rules and everything you had to go by to get acclimated to that system. The Jeep was a strange thing too, because you had to, in order to program the key on those, as I remember, because we had the Jeep franchise, you would go into the Jeep system, and the code for the trunk key, which you didn't have on a Jeep Cherokee, would actually be the code you'd use to program the SCIM, they called it, you know, security, whatever. But anyway, this bug hunt here this girl was a college student. Nobody else had worked on this car. She had it towed over there, and she had gone out there one morning to start it, and it just would start and die, start and die, start and die. That's all it would do. And so she just nobody had worked over, like a lot. Sometimes we would get stuff after a bunch of other people had given up on it, but this one here, nobody had touched it, and she came to us first. So there weren't any immobilizer codes that came out of the DTC receiver. All we had at this time that would talk to this one here was the OTC Genesis. I didn't have any. We didn't do a lot of Euro car work over there, and so I wasn't. I didn't typically have a scan tool at that time that would talk to a lot of European cars. Now we did Toyotas, and we did because there's a lot of Toyotas out there, Nissan, stuff like that. But one way or another, we didn't get anything to help us with this. And one of the things we noticed was when we were checking the spark, we found it would start popping and then go away while the engine was still spinning. You know, one quote-unquote expert that I talked to on Identifix says, no, that thing doesn't kill the spark. It only kills the fuel. Well, that was hooey, because this one is killing the spark. And I said, well, and it would start and die is what it would do. And so we had this this flashing bug light right here. That should have been a something right there that we noticed to begin with. Sometimes that stuff will get past you. In your Ford, the theft light, or the little LED on top of the dash, whenever you got a issue with the immobilizer or the passive anti-theft system, it'll blink rapidly instead of blinking at the normal speed, and that's telling you that's the reason why it won't start, and there can be several reasons for that. Well, this guy across town named Mike, he brought his Snap-on box that had all the bells and whistles, and he got some immobilizer related codes from the PCM, but he couldn't talk to the instrument cluster. But I found out that on that one, if you don't have a battery charger connected to the battery, and the battery's kind of weak, then you're not going to get good results from that Snap-on tester. Incidentally, and I'll talk a little bit about Joey later on, this guy that I know from up in Kansas. He said whenever we were working on a 2011 Volkswagen Passat or something, that if you put an aftermarket radio in one of those, as soon as you plug the scan tool in, it's liable to burn the scan tool up, which is really weird, but one way or another. So I like to see, use this battery charger I got from Joey at aetools.us. If you have never bought anything from them, they are an extremely good source for anything and everything. That is, it doesn't matter what OEM scan tool you're wanting, they've got it. They've got laptops up there that are practically waterproof and bulletproof and everything else that you can use in the shop and all that. But you can look up aetools.us. It's one of my favorite people. And Joey, the guy that runs that place and owns it, is a friend of mine. And I met him back in, first time I met him was back in 2010 at the Up Your Voltage 18 hybrid class that Craig Van Battenberg does. And Joey was actually on my team because we had 4 teams, and he was, you know, I was the foreman of one of the teams, and Joey was on it. But anyway, I had that battery charger connected, that ripple-free charger. So I called Joey up, and I said, look, I got this Volkswagen here. It's got this, you know, issues with the immobilizer. I'm not exactly sure what to do with it. And he says, he gave me 3 very important pieces of information. Joey knows this stuff inside out. Sometimes whenever I had knew about one situation where the dealerships could not fix this Dodge or whatever it was, couldn't get it where it would start, and so they actually up there, they told the person that owned the vehicle to have it towed over there to Joey, and Joey managed to get that thing going. When the dealers and the Chrysler engineers and everybody else ran out of ideas, Joey is just that sharp. But first, he said the best tool to talk to a VW the right way is the VAGCOM from Rostec. So I bought a cable from him. I got it out there. I should have got it out of my toolbox and held it up and showed it to you. But you know, a cable's a cable, right? So I bought the cable from him. He sent it. The Rostec software was a free download. But he also said if it turned out to be an immobilizer issue, I'd be out of business if I couldn't extract the 4-digit pin from the cluster, and if it had to have a cluster. So that takes a different cable and a different software and a different dongle, you know. So finally, Joey said the cluster frequently is a problem on these platforms when the immobilizer doesn't work, and a replacement cluster would be the wisest first choice. Okay, so I went ahead and got this cable plugged into my laptop and downloaded the software. Got a powertrain data bus missing message from the instrument cluster. It actually pointed to the cluster as a possible problem. You know, basically, I went into the engine, right? So I went into the engine part of it. Okay, so then I went into the instruments. I said, well, let's go see what the cluster looks like. And so despite the missing cluster message, I was boneheaded enough to get sidetracked by these 2 instrument cluster DTCs that told me the key signal was weak and or the lock cylinder pickup coil was bad, which would be your little antenna, you know, that goes around the stick the key through there, and it sends that burst out and wakes up the chip in the key, and then the code goes out to the module and all that stuff. Now, incidentally, on these, the immobilizer system can be in various different places. Some of the ones that I worked on would either be built into the body computer, they could be built into the PCM, could be in the instrument cluster, even on a Ford. It could have a standalone module. So one of the first things that we had to do when we were working on Fords was find out where is this immobilizer system, you know, brain, you know, what module is it that's actually the heart of the immobilizer system, or what Ford called passive anti-theft. Well, we gathered pertinent data. The cluster was complaining it couldn't see the key. The immobilizer antenna seemed like a logical possibility. After all, it activates the chip in the key and reads that code. Now, where I went off rail was to start with, the PCM told me it couldn't talk to the cluster. That was important because the cluster has to tell the PCM it's okay to start the vehicle. See, that was one of these things where you're getting so deep into the weeds you're not really thinking clearly. Alright, so while this 2001 Beetle had a serial number beyond the 430,000 VIN threshold that separates Immobilizer 2 from Immobilizer 3, because you got different rules, this car had Immobilizer 2. Didn't really make any sense. This car was kind of a morphodite anyway, and I'll tell you a little more about that later. Alright, so there was more confusion. At the same time, we got these codes from the engine controller, which muddied our thinking even further. Sorting this stuff out can be a pain on an unfamiliar platform, and I wasn't familiar with these VW Beetles. Engine start blocked by immobilizer. Okay, well, that's the way it would be if the key wasn't being read. Internal control module, processor fault. Powertrain data bus, missing message from instrument cluster. There's that one again, you see. Now these 16 series codes and 6 series codes are typically immobilizer related codes on systems like this. On some of your Fords, even after you fixed everything, if you didn't clear that 6 series code, you know, that P6XX, you know, P06X code or whatever, P16XX, you wouldn't be, it still wouldn't be able to start. Okay, so I got a used 2001 Beetle steering column. It was easy to get from the local salvage yard. It had a chipped switchblade key with it, just for grins. I said, okay, that's giving me the new antenna, a different key, and all that. So just for grins, I'm going to do this. So to program the new key, I had to go ahead and pay him $600 for another cable and a dongle, and download this VAG Taco stuff I was talking about earlier. And see, this was a different deal, different cable, different dongle, different deal, different program. And it says, and it's connected to this new Beetle before the 2001 year. And it said, go ahead, you know, which is odd, seek mileage record. It was now able to find the mileage record. You had to read the pin code first. The pin code's in the cluster, and this thing is the only thing that will get you that pin code unless you're one of, you know, you got a dealer system, and I didn't have that, didn't want that, you know. So working our way to the solution using a second cable, plugged in the dongle, loaded the software, and retrieved the cluster's pin number. So I got out of the cluster, I got the pin number, which was 2886. It was a 4-digit pin. You know, that number, if you don't have it, you know, obviously there's a lot of different 4-digit numbers you could have. You're out of business when it comes to programming a key. I used the Rostec software to attempt to erase all pre-existing keys and program the new one, since I had that pin number, so I could do that. Well, it wouldn't work. So I caved in and ordered a cluster from the local salvage yard for $125, and I smacked myself in the forehead for not listening to Joey in the first place. The cluster was the problem all along. Well, with the cluster on its way from the salvage yard, I installed the used ignition lock cylinder from the salvage yard column, thinking the antenna on the original lock cylinder might be an issue, because I did get a code for that. An attempt to program the used key and cylinder to the original cluster was a failure, and now neither of the other keys would fit. In other words, she had bought a new key, you know, that had a chip in it, you know, from the Volkswagen dealer, and had it cut to fit and all that sort of thing. And so the salvage yard, so I had 3 keys. I had one that fit the salvage yard column, and then I had 2 that fit the original column. The salvage yard asked when I was ordering the cluster, though, if it was manual or automatic transmission. It had a Pernzel stick in the floor, so I told them it was automatic, and it was. While that was true, it turned out to be a bad question where the cluster was for this car. The cluster they sent threw a bunch of DTCs about a missing transmission controller. This was a non-electronic automatic transaxle. And, you know, the serial number stuff wasn't lining up on it. The replacement cluster's part number ended in 901, and the original cluster's part number ended in 906. And I noticed that even before I installed it, but I figured, what the hey, you know. Okay, so called the salvage yard, gave him the part number information. The guy informed me this car had been outfitted with a cluster for a manual transmission Beetle, despite the fact that it was an automatic. So it didn't have an electronic automatic transmission. It had one of the older ones, maybe a leftover on the assembly line. I don't know. They popped it in there. Well, the factory had stuffed an Immobilizer 2 cluster on this one because it had no transmission electronics. Then there was that 43,000 VIN threshold that turned out to be wrong. See, so it's just a screwed up mess there all the way around. It seemed like I had curveballs being thrown at me from every direction. Well, I made some progress, got the right cluster, we installed it, but we couldn't get it to take the key. Even though measuring blocks 21, 22, and 23 in the cluster indicated the key was okay, I'd never received those results before now. Alright, so here we are again. The salvage yard key, it turned out, was no good. When I disassembled the salvage yard key, I saw this busted up chip in here. This was ridiculous. I don't know how that chip got busted up, because they got it down in here where it's so carefully protected. This was her original key. Okay, so that's the reason this key on this salvage yard column was not able to be programmed, because it had a busted up chip. Alright, so I taped the good chip from the customer's original key to the salvage yard key, because that was what the column that was in the car right now, and or the lock cylinder and all. So if I'd ordered a replacement cluster to begin with, this fight would have been over quickly, but now I know things I never would have known otherwise. Taped that to the key, programmed it, it fired right up. We were on the way to being to a photo finish. We assembled the original key with the good chip, swapped out the lock cylinder, programmed the cluster to accept her original key and the other one she had purchased from the dealer. Now we had 2 good keys, no flashing bug light, and a car that would start and run. This was a wild ride, y'all, and there was a lot of stuff that, you know, even if I had just ordered the cluster to start with, I would have sort of had that little curveball about the brake over the VIN, the automatic that didn't have electronics, even though it was supposed to have, and so on and so forth. What I learned from this was something I already knew but failed to apply. Pay attention when somebody smarter than you is doing the talking. We all have a tendency to think, well, you know, this guy right here can't know everything, so I'm just going to go ahead and try to figure it out my own way, which was stupid, but it, you know, it kind of got me in trouble. But this was me and Joey at the trade show up there in Kansas City, or in actually Overland Park, whenever I went up there a few times. Here she was back on the road and happy again, and we won. Now I will say that later on she came back. She said everything's great except the needle on the cluster waggles around whenever I'm driving down the road at certain speeds, and so I had to get them to send me yet another cluster, and I had to redo all that programming. Not long after that, I mean that same week, the diesel department down there had a diesel Jetta that belonged to one of the maintenance men down there that they were trying to fix. He would start and die, start and die, start and die. And they had actually thought it was the cutoff solenoid in the fuel pump, and they had soldered it and messed that all up and everything. So he brought it up there to us, and I've looked at his anti-theft light, and it was flashing the same way it was on his Bug. And so I went in there, retrieved his code, got him another key, reprogrammed it. But the problem was down there at the diesel department, they had messed up the fuel shut-off solenoid in the injector pump. I had to replace that too. It was $100. But see, I was able to fix that diesel Jetta really fast and really cleanly because of the experience I had on this one here, and I also had all the tools to do it with. So anyway, that was just that was a great deal of fun, and we've been here nearly 18 minutes. I hope you guys got something out of this. Let me know if you did or if you didn't. You may not ever run into what I ran into, but this, like I say, this was a wild ride, and I wanted to share the story. I guess I'll talk to you guys next week.